Mistborn, Era 1 versus Era 2. Which one is better? Now, I would say Era 2, but I do think that the average person would say Era 1. And this is a fascinating discussion for me because it's so easy to have this discussion. Because Era 1 and Era 2 are quite different in ways I'll get into. And so that means that pretty much every single person who reads them has a favorite, has one that clicks with them better than the other, because they're not the exact same books. Mistborn Era 1 is very found family heist novel, gloomy, dramatic, end of the world apocalypse scale. And then Era 2 takes place about 200 years after that trilogy, and it is very steampunk, cowboy, detective, urban fantasy kind of book. And if you ask the average person, do you like Era 1 or Era 2 better? Most people will say Era 1. A fact which is handily backed up by the data from the average Goodreads ratings for these books. But here's my theory for that. I think it's a mismatch of audiences. Who is the average person that picks up the first books, Era 1? The kind of person who is looking for a book that has a heist, a found family, a little bit of a gloomy atmosphere, etc. Who are the people that pick up Mistborn Era 2? The people who have read Mistborn Era 1. And the people who will love one of them and the people who will love another one, like I said, aren't the same people. But I love Era 2 way more than I love Era 1. I liked Era 1, 4 or 5 stars for all the books. I love Era 2, 5 stars for all of the books. And my favorite book of Era 2 is Alloy of Law. So now I would like to pick apart all of the reasons why I love Alloy of Law, why it's exactly my kind of book. And I think it should get some more love in order to attract people to the series that maybe wouldn't have liked Mistborn Era 1, but this is actually a pretty good starting place if you just want to skip to Era 2 and start with Alloy of Law. The first thing that I love about this book is its prologue. I know, how original, loving the exact beginning of a book, but it is fantastic. Let's say, what do you want out of the beginning of a book? After reading the first chapter of a book, you should at least have a feeling for the following things. What is the setting? How in general do things work? What is the tone of this book? Hopefully you also know who the main character is and what their major conflict of the book might be. And that doesn't all have to be in the very first chapter or prologue or whatever, but you want to get those pieces as soon as possible. And we get all of those pieces very quickly in a very efficient way. This book opens up with our main character, 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐊𝐒, as a sheriff in the Wild West using his magical powers to track down a serial killer. His partner in this endeavor is his wife, 𝐿𝐿e. And at the end of this little section, his wife dies tragic. And you know what? We get it all in this little section, and I admire it so much because you know exactly after reading this first chapter if this book is for you. You know what you're getting yourself into here. You've got some very dramatic moments with his wife dying tragically, but you also have just some silly puns and jokes worked in through here. You get a quick overview of how the magic works, and you understand the personality of our main character, and you get right from the get-go his emotional conflict of this book, of his grief of losing his wife, and how is he going to work through this? If these are the kind of plot lines and tonal elements which excite you, you have all the pieces you need to be really excited about this book. And that is how I have always started out my reading of this book. I'm just overjoyed that this is not a carbon copy of the tone and the pacing and every element from Era 1. It's its own thing. It's a separate series that happens to take place in the same world, practically. It's in the same general genre of epic fantasy as Era 1, but it's a distinctly different flavor and subgenre of fantasy than Era 1 is. And one of the many reasons why I love this book so much is the strong character arc for our main characters, Wax and Marcy. I know you think that Wayne is the other main character, but in this book, he doesn't really have any plot arc. He's just kind of the comic relief. In future books, he becomes one of the main characters. In this book, I think he's more of a side character. But our characters, Wax and Marcy, they get character arcs and growth and overcoming things and becoming more confident in their own ways. And it's wonderful. Let's talk about Wax's for a minute. Wax, from the very beginning, is suffering from the trauma of watching his wife die, is suffering from the guilt of letting that happen, etc., etc. And he has some PTSD from that incident and therefore is hesitant to handle guns and take up his duty as a lawman like he was before. And so he has retired. But you know, he still kind of wants to do it, and he still kind of feels like he needs to do it when things come up that need his attention, need his assistance. And so from the very beginning of the book, we get the setup. Wax used to be an awesome, competent lawman. Problem: he now has PTSD and has decided to retire from that and become a politician instead. Further problem, but there are some bad guys that really need to be stopped by a lawman with his magical powers, and it could be really awesome if he joined into the fight. He tries and fails and tries and fails and eventually succeeds. And so his emotional journey of re-embracing his role as a hero is directly tied in with the plot and mystery and his task and quest of the book of, doing all those heroic things, which is honestly one of the places that I really admire the writing of Brandon Sanderson. It's here, it's in the Stormlight Archive. Oftentimes character growth and the quest and awesomeness of the characters are very closely linked, which is fun. Ugh, who am I kidding with this hairstyle? It's much too hot in this apartment right now to have my hair down. It's summer. I'm in Arizona. This apartment's about 80 degrees right now. I thought this would work out. Now I have a little frill. That's exciting, right? And now, what about our other main character, Marcy? One of the things that fascinates me in the works of Brandon Sanderson is how he writes women, which in general is really good and gets better every book. I feel like in the discourse of female main characters in fantasy, once upon a time it was the girls get saved by the guys, and then there was pushback against that, and then it became, no, the girls save themselves, and they are total warriors, no emotions, and they just became versions of toxic masculinity in themselves sometimes. And then we got pushback on that, and the pendulum swings back and forth. But I think Marcy is a really good example of a character that is really well balanced, that is feminist in her own way. Because Marcy wants to save the world. But she wants to do it through becoming a solicitor. She wants to do it through helping clean up the city. She wants to do it through statistics and maybe being part of the rifle club, but she doesn't really want to get into fights. So in her own way, Marcy is fighting against this sexist system that she finds herself in. But it's not like she has to reject every part of femininity to do that. She still likes wearing dresses, etc., etc. Just like any person with their gender identity might like some of the stereotypes and might dislike and move against other stereotypes. And she has been told again and again that she isn't cut out for the crime fighting. But this is the book where she does it anyway, and she overcomes her fear of it, becomes more confident in it, and becomes more capable in it. A character arc that continues throughout the books, and I love it. I love the character of Marcy. She's just so good. She's so good because she's easy to root for because she's competent and fun, but she also has flaws, which makes her interesting and easy to engage with. At the core of it, Mistborn Era 2 is a lot about reputation. Wax is pulled between his two reputations of being a nobleman from the city and a lawman from the Wild West. Marcy is struggling with the framework of the expectations of being ladylike. Wayne leans into his reputation that people think he's a goofball, and that's a really good way to have people underestimate you. I have a confession to make. When I first read these books, I didn't realize the pun in having our dynamic duo be named Wax and Wayne. And as soon as someone pointed that out to me, like, oh yeah, Wax and Wayne, like the moon, and I was like, of course! But if their names didn't clue you in, which they didn't for me, Wax and Wayne are foils to each other. One of them is the uptight detective, and one of them is the goofball master of disguise. And that creates so much little bits of conflict between them. Yes, they're best friends, they're partners, they work well together, but also they challenge each other. And that just gives another bit of entertainment to this book whenever they're together on screen. Or whenever Wayne is with anyone on screen. He's just kind of a force of chaos in this book, and I love it. And after all of that in this book, after the awesome character progression, after the goofy tone, after all of the puns and jokes, after the wonderfully in-depth world of Mistborn, and after all of the fantastically choreographed and written fight scenes, the ending is also great. Because it resolves those fun character arcs I was talking about. And also, the ending of this book is the reason that Alloy of Law is my favorite Mistborn novel. Because it was originally planned to be a standalone. In the original plans, Era 2 was just going to be one book. Of course, Brandon Sanderson decided to write more, for which we are all grateful. I love more Brandon Sanderson books. Yes, please, especially Era 2 books. Love them. Great. But also, there's something to be said for how well this book wraps up. Yes, there are little hints of future plot lines, but compared to other first books in series, this one has a remarkably coherently final kind of wrapping up the plot ending. And that's one of the things that I love in books, is when everything feels like it wraps up nicely, is when we have an ending that is satisfying. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, but I do like a very cohesive, coherent, emotionally resonant ending. Other books in the series end more on cliffhangery kind of endings. Do more work setting up future books in the series, which I don't always love because it always leaves me with the feeling like, oh, now I have to read another book to figure out how these character arcs end? Great. But this one doesn't do all that. This one has the courage to be written more like a standalone. that just has a coincidental little bit sprinkled in at the end to tease for future books. So, what do you think of Alloy of Love? If you made it to the end of the video, give me some sort of hat emoji for Wayne's obsession with hats. And please let me know, do you prefer Mistborn Era 1 or Era 2? Let's have a discussion about that. Subscribe for more videos on Frizzle Fridays, and thank you for watching.